Hello and welcome to Who Corner to Corner podcast. My name is Jeff. I'm one of your hosts, and as always, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host Paul.
Hi, that's me. Hello there.
How are you today?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. Yes, I'm getting my face blasted by this really bright screen over here, so I'm going to do something about that, just like that.
That's better. Just turn the rest of it down a little bit.
That's what that is, mate.
Yeah, I can still see you. Turn it down a bit.
It's so funny. You make me laugh every day.
So we're not alone tonight. We love it when we're not alone on the podcast.
We have company.
Not one, but two guests tonight.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go for this and see if I get it right. So we're joined by Peter Anghelides. Oh dear.
He's fallen at the first hurdle.
I've fallen at the first hurdle.
Anghelides.
I'm going to let you in. Anghelides and Simon Guerrier. Is that right?
It'll do. Yeah, it's good.
It's a very good approximation, and thank you for trying.
One out of two. Thank you very much. So we're here tonight to get surnames wrong and talk about the Daily Doctor book.
Yes,
which you can see on the shelf behind Peter. Simon, have you got a copy to hand? And there.
Look at that. I'll just,
Paul, I'm going to Photoshop you holding one. We only got sent one copy.
Yeah.
So
Let's do that.
So let's kick it off by talking about the new book. So it's out now, isn't it?
Yes.
Am I right there?
Yes, it's been out since August.
It is. It was launched at the end of last month.
Oh, is it? Okay, I thought it was tag end of September. So okay, so it's been out a little while then. So tell us all about the book. What's it all about? I know, and Paul knows, but people listening might not.
Well, it's all about Doctor Who, and so each day of the year is we provide a quote from Doctor Who. We explain what that quote is, and then we try and suggest ways in which that quotation, that episode, can help you in your life. So kind of pointers, a bit of advice, things to try. That's the idea. So there's at least one quote from every Doctor Who story over the last 60 years, and a few of the related shows. So there's a bit of Sarah Jane Adventures in there. There's a few other bits and pieces. But yeah, just how Doctor Who can help you day to day in your life. That's kind of the idea.
And there's quite a story behind each of the quotes, it seems, because so when you say quotes, it's like it could be anything from like a line to like a paragraph, right? They could be quite chunky, and then there's a whole bunch of the kind of story behind them, sort of like you said, how you apply them to your life, how you might think about these things in your ordinary day. So where do you make how do you decide what's going to go into each of these?
Well, when
anyone wants to take that?
Yeah, when we started, the kind of the idea was that that you're kind of, you have the idea for the book and what's going to work, and then you've got to actually do the work of going through the episodes and trying to work out what you can use and things. And you don't want to use the same things again. You don't want to come up with the same lessons or advice again. So you kind of work it out as you do, or I don't know how Peter feels about this, but I kind of worked it out as I did it, and once I got a few under my belt, I kind of knew how this was going to go. And you want a bit of variety, so yes, some of them are longer, some of them are shorter. The longer they are, the less explanation you have to write afterwards, because they've all got to fit on a single page. So that's kind of what I was thinking. Peter, how was it for you?
Well, I thought it was nice to think about what are the things which are characteristic of each episode, but not to necessarily go for the obvious ones. So you're trying to be a bit novel about these things. There are some that you can't really miss out, so you can't really not do the daisiest daisy, for example. You don't want them all to be things which people are expecting. So when we were looking through the different episodes, you were looking for things which you thought might spin off a thought. Some of them are specific advice from the Doctor, and some of them are things which just inspire a thought about how you might go about your life.
So how did you tackle this project? How much Doctor Who did you have to watch to do this?
Loads and loads.
Oh, there's never too much Doctor Who to watch. It's always a great excuse.
When the publishers came to you... I was going to say when the
nice thing
publishers.
about doing research is the longer
Yeah.
you do research, the less time you spend worrying about what you're going to write.
Yeah.
The longer you defer the point at which you actually put your fingers to the keyboard.
So
And I
when the
suppose
publishers.
This is going. This always happens if there's if there's like 4 of us on there. But I'm going to get one in here because you've had like a lifetime to research, I guess, as bona fide Doctor Who fans that you both are, of course.
Yes, this is what I think what you're skirting around is what my wife refers to as my wrong knowledge. That I know an awful lot of Doctor Who stuff. Actually, I feel it's not all in my head. What I've got is a room full of Doctor Who stuff that I can go and check. A bit like Peter, I've got bookshelves and bookshelves festooned with stuff. So, so I kind of had, I certainly had a kind of head start on this sort of stuff. Actually, what you then find is you've got to go back and double check everything anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because you know that Doctor Who fans are going to be reading this, and if you get something wrong, you're going to get called out on it. So you can rely on your memory of particular quotations from the series, but then you go, do you know, am I quite sure that's exactly how it is, or is that just how I've remembered it over all these years? And
we talked about
it.
Yeah, we talked about similar, didn't we? What do they call it? The Mandela effect, where people kind of misremember things, you know, and you go, oh yeah, you know, this is what happened, like, you know, the Cybermen coming out of the Thames or something, and, you know, that's not what happened at all, of course. But, you know, yes, so like you're saying, Peter, you think, oh yeah, I've got this quote, and then actually you go and check it and realise, yeah, got it wrong, so... better proof
or
it all,
the sort of the equivalent, Doctor Who equivalent of what they call mondegreens in music, where you misremember a lyric in a particular way.
I've not heard of that word before. I've learned something tonight. This is good.
Now I know what's always happening to me.
There'll be a test
the
at the
older I
end.
get.
Yeah, it's just a daily thing now. As you get older,
just happens now. Yeah.
So,
And then, being the pedants that we are, we then needed to go back and say, well, that was how it was in the script, but how was it actually in the broadcast episode? And which is right. If somebody stumbled over a line, then do you say, well, let's do it exactly as they stumbled over the line, or do you say, well, the intention was this in the line, so let's put that in the book?
Yeah, there was definitely some stuff
came
about
up with a happy combination of the two.
There was definitely some things where the grammar and the, you know, where we were putting in commas and dashes. There was a bit of going back to the original script to see how we transcribed some of the stuff. I think there may even have been some stuff about names of monsters or props and things as well. There was definitely a bit of going over the old paperwork, just because, as Peter said, we're very pedantic, and hopefully our readership is as well.
Yeah, well, I would think, quite high chance of that. Yeah. So, did you have, you know, a list of, you know, 300 plus, you know, kind of topics that you wanted to cover in this, or did you, you know, generate them as you were watching back through episodes or scripting? How did you kind of come up with it all? Because it's really kind of broad ranging in the stuff that it you know talks about, isn't it?
Yeah, we approached it the other way round, which is that we started with the episodes, with the stories. So one of the first things that happened once we had been given the go-ahead for this was I made a spreadsheet of story titles in order.
Yes, I like that approach.
And then every time we filled it, every time we completed an entry, we added a 1 to the next column related to that story. And that meant that we kept a running total of how many we'd done, but also because that list was all the stories in order, we knew we were doing 1 per story. And then once we got to the end of that, we could look at how many entries we had left and how we were going to cater for that. So actually, but Peter did more of that. I think Peter did more of the, when we got to the stage of going, what else are we going to have there? You know, which stories deserve 2 quotes from them, and where else are we going to source things from? So and actually that part of it Peter was more on. So Peter, how did you choose what to double up on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, did you have any?
I was going through a particular story, and I couldn't make my mind up about what I thought was a particularly compelling quotation. I had 2 or 3, or in some cases 4. I'd make a note. Oh, I quite like all of those, but we can't have 4 from one story. I think the most we've got is 2, isn't it, from particular stories? So I might have reluctantly said, well, we can't have that one. My thought also was that as far as possible, you wanted it to be something the Doctor had said or something that had been said to the Doctor. Some of the episodes didn't necessarily lend themselves to that, but you wanted to be led by the Doctor as the central character, whatever he or she is saying in the particular episode. And that then guided me to winnow through the options that I had. It was, I have to say, extremely useful that Simon came up with this spreadsheet. I'm a great fan of spreadsheets, dull fellow that I am.
So,
when it comes to writing.
Yeah, Paul, you are quite a spreadsheet fan as well, aren't you? You should,
because I have to be. I never grew up a spreadsheet fan, but they are complete anathema. But you cannot deny their usefulness for organising things that your brain cannot. So,
I saw Paul's eyes lighting up when the word spreadsheet passed from Simon's lips.
Yes,
I love it. I love a good spreadsheet.
My children tease me about my spreadsheet because if I'm writing something, my children know I'm serious about it once I've got the spreadsheet organised for the number of words per chapter or the number of words that need writing within a particular period of time. I think that sometimes they think I spend more time on the spreadsheet than I do on the writing.
I have
it's all in the prep, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. I have a disturbing number of Doctor Who spreadsheets of one sort and another. Because partly I do a infographics, a data related column for Doctor Who magazine every 4 weeks. So I'm constantly crunching numbers or trying to work out how we can find some way in. And then I was writing a thing earlier this year and realised I was going to have to put all of the sort of paperwork from the early 60s I had access to. I was going to have to compile it and put it in order just so I could get my own head around it. And that's turned out to be quite useful for some other stuff. But yeah, there was a time when the very idea of doing a spreadsheet would have horrified me, and now it's quite a lot of my life. What have I become?
I know. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, my 20.
We're really spelling the appeal of this book, aren't we, Simon? By talking about spreadsheets. It's the right riveting read, is what we want to say.
They are important. I'll tell you for why. Because the amount of times I've seen like a Doctor Who book or something on eBay, thinking, "Oh, brilliant! I'm going to pay 10 quid, 20 quid, or whatever it is for that," only to realise that I've already got it.
Yeah.
Right. Probably several times over, and I paid like the original $5.99 or whatever it is. So, yeah, spreadsheets are useful. They can actually save you money, kids. Yeah, true fact. Right.
Sadly, some of us are old enough to remember when Doctor Who books cost 25p each.
Oh yes, yeah, same. Well, actually, I think that's
4 shillings in old money. 5 shillings.
Yeah. Were they in black and white?
35p. Brain and Morbius. That's so funny.
Yes, they're all handwritten. All handwritten on slate.
They're on slate. Yeah. Oh dear, we jest. But we are a bunch of oldies, I'm afraid. Yeah, at least I am anyway.
Well, I'm nearly there. Yeah. So I guess there's enough quotes that were not used that you could perhaps make a sequel to the book.
I'm not sure. There were 1 or 2 stories where you felt, there was bags of stuff happening in the story, but was there a particularly compelling quotation to come out of it? I don't know. What do you feel, Simon? Because you did the first pass.
I think technically, yes, you could. But I think that's I think what this book does is to give you a different way of engaging with Doctor Who, which is that it kind of... I don't know about you, Peter, but I find now watching Doctor Who since I've done the book, I'm kind of picking up on what you can draw from it and what would be a practical application from elements of the story. I mean, as we say in our introduction, there are elements of Doctor Who that are quite fun and interesting, and the Doctor shows intelligence, but they're dealing in things that don't relate to everyday life. You're not going to face a Tythonian in a tunnel who has lost the ability to communicate. That's a less likely
and
thing
offers
to
you an
happen.
appendage.
Exactly. There are situations where I can see that might be quite useful, to know that that's a way to make friends with people. I don't know, but we were kind of trying to go for more everyday stuff. And that kind of changes how you view Doctor Who and view particular stories. So I think one of the things that got talked about in the very early conversations we had about this book is the thing about Sherlock Holmes stories is that Sherlock Holmes is continually encouraging Dr. Watson to apply those methods of deduction and abduction to work out what's going on. And Watson gets better, more or less, as a result of this, and spots things, and sometimes is ahead of the game and things. And as a reader, you are as well. It kind of teaches you how to deduce stuff. And I kind of hope that this book does that for the reader as well, that you kind of take that on and see these things as well. So there's no call for a second book because you're kind of already doing that yourselves. And our next book should be about something else. That's my feeling.
That's fair enough.
Nightly Doctor.
Yeah.
The darker side. Yeah,
the darker side. But I like it because because what you're saying there and what the book seems to propose is that, or remind us, is that the Doctor's view on how to deal with conflict and how to resolve not really resolving relationships, probably fragmented relationships, if anything, but the Doctor's outlook on life and the way they go about sorting stuff out is a very hopeful and optimistic kind of message, isn't it? I mean, when I first started getting into Doctor Who, I think one of the things that really attracted me was here's a hero who doesn't go in all fisticuffs, guns blazing, kind of the whole macho kind of action hero sort of style. Here's someone who may have a dark side, but we don't really see it. It's more about the light and the optimism, and that would seem to me to provide the perfect rationale behind the book that you guys put together. So it's it kind of, the book that you have reinforces that, I would say.
Yeah, the book's very sort of positive, kind of hopeful in
positive affirmations, and by goodness, we need them right now. That's for sure.
And the like you were saying, you take a quote and then how you can apply the kind of sentiment of that to your everyday life, and I think it's offering kind of hopeful and optimistic ways of approaching life. And that's kind of a bit like Paul saying, how I kind of view the Doctor overall is a hopeful, joyful, optimistic character, and the show is essentially about being kind to people and helping people amongst the monsters and the mayhem and stuff like that. But it's not every day you encounter that kind of thing, like you're saying, Simon. So I think taking those kind of core things and just trying to bring that into your own life a little bit is very positive. I
think the word I'd use rather than optimistic, I don't know how Peter feels about this, but actually going through the process of doing this, I think rather than optimistic, I would use the word practical. The Doctor is often is quite a doer. So in facing any problem or whatever, the Doctor's response is generally to get active and hands-on, and not always in a way that necessarily makes things better immediately. I was very conscious because I started with because of the way that we divided things up. I started with a lot of the early stories. So, in the original Dalek story, the Doctor doesn't get his own way, so sabotages the TARDIS and puts all his friends' lives at risk. That's quite a tricky one to take a sort of positive thing from. So there's a certain amount of it was a harder job than just going through each story looking for positive, uplifting stuff. It was much more about how can you make a difference? What should your action be in these circumstances? That was more the kind of Peter. How did you find that as well? Maybe that was just
Yeah,
me.
I agree. It's the doctor isn't passive. The doctor wants to be involved, and sometimes doesn't always get it right. But there's a pragmatism about what the doctor does in stories to progress things, and not necessarily for his or her own best needs. It could be for others as well. Sometimes it's inspiring others. Sometimes it's encouraging others. Sometimes it's explaining what's going on.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, actually. So in some ways, I mean, I guess we all get different things out of it, don't we? I'm kind of thinking the Ninth Doctor as well, and the way that the Ninth Doctor kind of inspires people to rise up and be the hero. You know, he's not always the person who pulls the switch. You know, he'll convince somebody else that they can pull the switch, that it means something for them, that they can stand up and fight the Daleks, even if they're not going to particularly survive it. So, yeah, interesting. Yeah, but I like that. So kind of self-help and inspiration.
Yeah, there's a good example of...
It's not completely black and white, is it?
No, I mean, a good example that I tried to work into the book is the sequence in The Ark in Space where Sarah gets trapped in a tunnel and the Doctor motivates her to get herself out of it by being a bit rude to her and being a bit mean.
Quite rude.
And she's so determined to prove him wrong that she gets herself out. Now, on screen, that works really well. It's really difficult to make that the quotation and explain the context and then find a lesson in it.
Yeah.
And I struggled with I thought that would be a really good one. You know, we were talking earlier about my sort of knowledge of Doctor Who, so I thought that's a good one. That's a bit different. That'll be a good one to do. And actually trying to make that work on paper just didn't come across, because it just makes the Doctor sound like, you know, not very nice. Whereas in
the bit of bully, basically.
Whereas watching it, that's not what you get at all. So what happens is that
because you've got the context, haven't you?
Yeah, and so that those kind of things change your perspective, and you see new things, you make new connections in what you're watching. Even though I know the Ark in Space really well, that kind of gave me a new on it, I guess.
Yeah. So, Peter, how did you guys divide the writing duties between you then? Did you just kind of go at it, or was there a plan?
Yeah, you said, Simon, you did more of the earlier stuff. So, yeah, did you take it alternate doctors each, or, you know, how did you approach it?
Simon did the first Doctors, and I did the ones towards the end, just because that was the way it happened to pan out. Which doesn't mean to say that I didn't do any of the earlier Doctors, because sometimes you went back and tried to come up with some duplicates.
So
when, you know, because there aren't 365 individual stories.
And I did some of the later ones.
So how far did you get, Simon? Did you get halfway through Tennant, or?
I think so. I did. So when we began, I did a selection. Yeah. So a few people had chipped in ideas. So the idea that the book was originated by Steve Tribe, and so he'd written some entries that I inherited. I think I can't remember how many of his were used in the end. It was sort of 5 or 6, I think. There was an entry written by Matthew Sweet that didn't fit the format as it became, so I reworked that.
Right.
And then they wanted to see early on a kind of this is how it will work in a random order. So I did sort of whatever it was. I took the Steve ones, I took the Matthew one, and I added a few of my own, and kind of had a random pattern of them. And once I'd done that, then I put the spreadsheet together, ticked those off on the spreadsheet, and then worked through it in order. And I think I got to Gridlock. I think that's where we'd handed over.
So series 3, yeah.
But you'd also picked up some of your favourites from later Doctors as well.
Yeah. So and I think I'd missed some.
I think you did. I think you did the first David Whitaker story, for example.
Yeah. It was. I mean, because I think I started just by going, what can I think of?
Yeah.
And then I realised we needed to be more orderly about that, because otherwise we were going to repeat ourselves, and and especially sharing the project and things that wasn't going to work. So yeah, it was it was a bit chaotic to begin with, and then there was a bit of structure to it.
Yeah.
But stylistically, you don't want it to read like it's written by two different people. You want it to be consistent without being foolishly consistent throughout. And one of the nice things that our editor Steve said at the end was that you couldn't tell the difference.
Yes,
I think he meant that as a compliment, didn't he?
Yes, I was just saying, yes, in this case, yeah. So, how long have you been were you working on the book?
You're both as good as each other, is what he was saying, right?
That's what you mean. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, how long were you working on the book? Between you before it came out, because it must have been quite an undertaking.
Yeah, I think there was a bit that the early stages are all a bit. Can you sit on a meeting for half an hour? Can you sit on a chat? So there was a bit of that. Once we actually got going, I think it was about 6-8 weeks, something of that. So, does that tally with you, Peter?
Yeah. And also, as I've said, because I'm obsessed with spreadsheets. Oh no, he's talking about spreadsheets again. I had a spreadsheet which said, if I'm going to have to meet the deadline for submitting this first draft, and I've got to write this many entries, then I need to write this many per day, and today I've written this many, and my spreadsheet then extrapolated how many days I was going to have left, and whether I was on time, or whether I could have a day off. So about 6 weeks is probably about right.
I thought you were going. Yeah, I thought you were going to say it took like a year to go through everything and watch stuff, and that's impressive.
Jeff, you would take a year to do it. I know you would, and it would only be the last 2 weeks that anything actually got done.
Well,
I don't.
I mean, this is where having
you saying something.
This is where having a knowledge of Doctor Who helps, because you kind of have a rough idea what you can use for a story, so you at least know where to look, and you can kind of skip to that bit of the episode or look for particular things. So as long as you've got that kind of idea, you can get them. You can identify the quote and write the context bit, the what's been happening in the story so far, because the big thing is that you have to assume that I'm aware that there are viewers who don't know, who are fans of Doctor Who now, but who don't know the early stuff or particular periods of it.
Yeah.
And there are also fans of old Doctor Who have only seen more recent episodes once, shockingly. So they don't know the newer stuff. So you kind of need that explanation in to cover everybody. Where the time was taken was in working out what your take was going to be. So what I'd find is I'd identify good quotes or things, and then I might go off and do the washing up, or do the school run or whatever, and
let it kind of spin.
And then it'd be kind of like, right, I've worked out where I'm going to go with that, but also having done that, I've also worked out another take for something else I can do. So I'd be kind of I'd be adding to the spreadsheet, this later episode I could do something about X, or I could do something about Y. So that was kind of how it's. But Peter, was that different for you?
And you can also make sure that you don't have to retell the entire story again. You just need to explain the context of what's happening in an interesting and compelling and preferably amusing way as well, without explaining the entire backstory for a 6-part story.
Yeah, 4 pages of episode recap before you get to the the point of the thing.
I've had training in this, so when we write for Big Finish, you can assume that people listening to Big Finish listen from the start to the end, and are probably listening on reasonably good kit, so you can have stereo and stuff, and so you don't need to explain everything all the time. But if you're making drama,
it's like a shorthand that you can
Exactly. But if you're writing drama or documentaries for broadcast on radio, you have to remember that some people are going to be coming in halfway through, or 10 minutes before the end. And they might be what's referred to as listening with one ear, where they're doing something else at the same time, like driving or washing up or whatever. So what you periodically have to do is kind of bring them up to speed. And that doesn't mean that you have to remind them of everything. You just have to tell them what's important now. And I used to do all sorts of sort of exercises in this kind of thing when I was mentoring people about how you bring people up to speed. They don't need to know the whole story. They just need to know what's important for the next bit. And there's a really good example of this in the James Bond film Spyfall, where in the last bit of the film, there's a battle in a house, and a new character comes in, played by Albert Finney. And Albert Finney...
the gamekeeper.
Exactly, the gamekeeper. Clearly written to be played by Sean Connery, who said no, sadly. Yeah. But Albert Finney turns to James Bond. They're stocking up all their guns. And Albert Finney turns to him and says, so what's going on? And James Bond goes...
that's it.
There's some bad guys. They're going to try and kill us.
The recap.
We're going to kill them first. And that's all you need to know. That's it. That's the whole first hour or however much of the film has gone by, summed up. That's all you need to know. And so that's kind of the mentality.
This is where we are in the plot.
Yeah. And so with these quotes...
I like it. Of course, that's Skyfall.
That's a really good insight, Simon. Yeah. And to that point about what Big Finish does, we know that Big Finish listeners tend to be quite intensive listeners. So as Simon says, they'll have their earphones on, they're very attentive. It's a more niche audience who are paying attention not just to what's happening in that particular episode, but how it relates to others. So when I'm writing stuff there, I'm conscious that I can, if you like, get away with stuff because they're paying attention. And what's more, they'll listen to it more than once. Whereas when I was writing something like pest control for the BBC, then I know that that's more likely to be the sort of thing that parents will stick into the CD in the car when they're driving their kids down the motorway to go and see their family. And, they're not going to rewind stuff. And there's going to be distractions and there's going to be other things happening in the car. And so there needs to be a slightly more linear route through things with some high points that they will spot. But you can't rely on that level of attention throughout the story.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I've listened to Pest Control and various other ones in that range. And they're very good, aren't they? But they are different to the Big Finish stuff. They're simpler's not the right, that's not being dismissive of it. But yeah, the Big Finish stuff, you're right. It's for people who are sitting down in the dark and listening to it, and that's all they're doing and concentrating on it, and therefore you can do more with it, can't you? In some ways.
Yeah. So the better you know the audience,
and there's also an expectation of that as well.
And the better you know your audience and what that kind of context within which they'll be engaging with what you're writing, the better you can tailor what you're writing. So, I mean, as we say in the introduction to our book, Peter and I don't know what's going on in our readers' lives. We don't know what problems or issues they may be facing. We kind of have to guess that. And what level do you play that at? Do you play that as you're going through a crisis, or do you play that at as just daily hints and tips? And I think we kind of settled on much more daily hints and tips, but with a sense that
that's what it feels like.
That every now and again you face a bigger challenge.
And also we need to be aware that not all of our readers have the same situations as well. So one of the good notes that we got from our editor Steve was occasionally I would write something about, because I'm a parent, so I'm thinking about what it's like to be a parent, my experience of having raised children with my wife and so on. But Steve said, not everyone who's reading this will have children, either because they're not at the stage of their life where they have children, or because they've chosen not to have children. So if you're writing it, you're addressing it to somebody as a parent, you're addressing it, you're excluding some of the readers. So there were some very useful notes from Steve about how to not talk about raising children, for example, but to reflect that the person you're talking to might not have that personal experience in their life.
So is it about kind of finding that voice then?
Yeah. Because you don't have to be a parent to know people who have raised children, for example. It's just the way in which you happen to express it.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So, from the whole book, do you each have a favourite, quote and kind of bit of advice, and which Doctor did it come from?
Ooh.
I've
a question.
If you're not watching, on
there's such a range, because the pieces of advice range from things as profound as how you handle grief to how best to pack when you're going on holiday. So to choose one suggests that it's more important than some of the others.
There are. I think it's
and there were some where, as I was writing them, I thought this is quite profound as a story, but I don't want to trivialise it with the piece of advice I give as part of the sort of the learning point from it. But there were some fun ones. I quite like the one that I wrote for Time Heist, which is essentially about how to handle spam calls. That sounds like a really trivial thing. You might not think that's a characteristic of that particular story, but it was the thing that sprang to mind as a fun thing to do.
Yeah, and also very relevant to today's life with those calls. Yeah.
Whereas in contrast, I also really like writing the Vincent van Gogh piece of advice, which is it's about death by suicide, and that's something you want to make sure that you are treating tactfully, and not in the space of a one-page piece of advice sounding really trivial.
Yeah, quite right. Yeah.
And I spent probably more time on that one, thinking, what is the right tone to use, what is a piece of advice, and I didn't want to shy away from that as the subject of that particular episode, because to write something about here's how to do painting nicely about that episode would have been to trivialise the episode.
Yeah, it's not what that one's really about, is it?
Yeah.
What about you, Simon?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think rather than, I mean, I do have favourite quotes, and I knew pretty much as soon as I was told what this book was, as in, as soon as we knew what the format was going to be, I was going to get, for all, as Peter said, it was supposed to be things said by the Doctor, and in some cases, some things said to the Doctor. I knew a quote was going to go in this book in a scene that the Doctor's not in, when Sarah Jane Smith says to Queen Thalera of Peladon, "There's nothing only about being a girl, Your Majesty. Never mind why they made you a queen. The fact is you are the queen, so just you jolly well let them know it." Which is one of my favourite things ever. So I knew that was going to go in. But actually, as Peter said, the working out of quote and what you could say about it, that they're the ones that I was much more, where I feel like I've done a better job at drawing something out or finding a new perspective or finding something useful in. But again, I'm not sure favourite is the right word, really. There were ones where I got to the, I'd finish an entry and go, that's a good one. With the Daisiest Daisy, the big thing for me there was realising there was very little to add, because the Doctor, the context is all there.
It's quite complete, isn't it?
And the meaning is all there. So really the only thing that we, as I remember, was to trim the actual quote so that it fitted within the format of the book. So that those were the kind of decisions. And
to hone it down, because it's a conversation between the Doctor and Joe, isn't it?
Yeah.
One of the things we had to think about as we were choosing quotations was you want them to be the words that are said. There were one or two I looked at, and it was difficult to convey them without putting lots of stage directions in, and that rather draws away from the fact that the characters are saying something rather than the characters are doing something. So in that particular example, the way in which we did it was essentially the quotation was, I think it was the daisiest daisy I'd ever seen, I think is what we ended up with as the quotation. But then we describe in that entry what the Doctor says without Joe's interventions and comments in a structured way. So much of that entry is what's in the dialogue, which is unusual because most of the other ones are the quotation, some observations about the context, and then if you like, the learning point. And that was actually one of those rare ones, wasn't it, Simon, that we actually worked on quite a lot together.
Yes, yeah. And that was, as I say, it's so the sorts of things I found most satisfying were those kinds of that kind of collaboration, but also that kind of you had to think it through really, and because it was more, what's the word? It was more kind of a strenuous activity to get that right. That feels more rewarding.
Something you had to think about, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Is it kind of changed the way you look at Doctor Who, having done this? I mean, I know you guys are, you both written a lot about Doctor Who, so probably not. If it hasn't, that's fine. But thinking about Doctor Who in those terms to get this book written, did it kind of make you look at things slightly differently?
I went into every episode thinking that I loved some more than others, and I came out of everyone thinking that there's something to enjoy about every single one of them.
Yes,
so much so that
you
you'd end up doing a bit of research about a particular quotation, trying to make sure that the wording was right, and then watching far more of it than you were intending to in the first place. getting sucked into the story to watch the rest of it.
Yeah.
Was that the same for you, Simon?
Definitely. I also think something you said earlier about, the Doctor being optimistic and things. I think a lot of in several cases, the quotes I had in mind to begin with, when I went and checked them out, and then had to explain them in context, and then had to find something to say about them, they weren't quite as good as I'd initially thought, because actually a lot of them are quite context specific. Or what you find is that the rallying cry that the rallying talk you give before you run into battle is basically go and fight those people and fight them more than they fight us. There's not a lot to be learned or gleaned from that. And similarly, some of the kind of rousing stuff in Doctor Who, once you put that on paper and kind of look at what you can learn from it, it's kind of like, well, it's a bit self-explanatory, so or straightforward. So some of the some of the kind of speeches that I had in mind, I actually found were a bit too straightforward, and I needed to find something a bit more nuanced or a bit more interesting. So that then affects how you watch an episode, because a speech is coming up, or the Doctor's going to rally everybody round or whatever. So it changes those kind of things that I hadn't expected.
Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting point, actually, because obviously the Doctor is a character that within a fiction, a kind of adventure series, there's a lot of plot goes into this as well, right? Into Doctor Who stories, and the Doctor and the characters are quite often racing through the plot and reminding us what's going on and acting it out and all the rest of it. And it's interesting that with you talking about the Daisy sequence earlier, which is from the Time Monster, right? Which is, the plot of that is all over the place, but nonetheless, for that moment, it all kind of stops, doesn't it? They are literally in that prison, and it might have just been written to maybe fill out a couple of minutes, but nonetheless, it is one of the defining moments of that particular story. And I think that's
sometimes the magic of it, isn't it? Is that the things that fill in the gaps can be very powerful. There's that the Doctor's speech about the world revolving in Rose, for example, is to make up time to fill the number of minutes available in the episode.
It was, wasn't it?
But it's not just let's have them run up and down a street. It's let's have a moment where the Doctor talks to Rose about something that's important, illuminates his character, and tells her something about him.
Yeah, and similarly, things that are quite innocuous, I found quite useful. I got onto one of the entries is from the 10th Planet, and it's the First Doctor's final words on screen, and it's the fact that they're, now you'd make the Doctor's last words on screen a big thing, and the First Doctor says keep warm,
sensibly,
which kind of doesn't have the gravitas and doesn't have the whatever. So actually digging into that a bit was quite fun to do, and kind of and actually they're not the First Doctor's last words on screen. They're not even William Hartnell's last words as the Doctor, because he has last words in the Three Doctors, which are much more fitting. And once I'd made that connection, there was something really fun about that entry. That I think is probably one of the ones I really enjoyed getting my head round. It took a bit. It took a bit of, that was one where I needed a walk and some washing up and an extra cup of tea and a chocolate digestive before my subconscious put that all together.
Yeah.
One thing we tended to shy away from was talking about the metafiction of the series. There's a temptation as Doctor Who fans to link things together quite a lot, and it's useful to stay within the learning, the learning point for the particular episode. You couldn't always shy away from that sometimes, so we got away with that by having, for example, some quotations which were in multiple different episodes, like "Run." That's one of the ones that Simon wrote. I
didn't write it. That was Steve Tribe. That was Steve Tribe in his original his original go at this, and I wish I'd thought of that. It's such a good one. And I kind of we inherited that, but also from that we inherited the fact that we had a format, but we could break the format on occasion, which gave us a bit of freedom.
Yes. Yes, I was able to do one with spoilers, for example, as an example of one that had multiple different stories that he was in.
I'd like to just move off from the book for a minute. We'll come back to some Doctor Who stuff shortly, but I'd like to find out a bit more about you two. So, how did you both discover your love of writing?
I loved writing the stuff that was in my primary school, what you did at the weekend stuff, because it was a chance to practice writing, and I realised you could tell a story, and some of it was about the story of what I did at the weekend. I went off to visit Ringway Airport, and here's the adventure of how I went through the wrong door and got lost and had to be rescued. But also I realised quite early on that one of the things I could do is write. I switched on my television on Saturday and I watched episode 2 of Doctor Who and the Silurians. Retell the story, you see. And, I think I got away with that for about 2 or 3 episodes before my teacher asked me to write something else. But it was the idea of telling a story to someone else and getting a reaction that I really enjoyed. And I continued doing that through primary school, secondary school, university, fanzines, and then having the chance to do it professionally through BBC Books and Big Finish.
Well, I wanted to ask next about how you got your kind of, first professional break. So save that story for a moment, Peter, and tell us your origin, Simon.
Well, I've got young children of my own, and they write stories all the time, and their friends write stories all the time. They come home with school bags full of bits of paper of things they've written about, or they write little cards to each other and stuff. So I think that's just what you did as a kid, stories and drawings and things. I think there was I then was writing. I must have been about 8 or 9, and I was writing stories that involved my little brother. So he would, they were basically. I was writing down the games we played as kids. So there was a bit of Doctor Who stories, there was a bit of James Bond, there was a bit of Star Wars, the things that we were into, a bit of A-Team, and all quite generic and silly and stuff. But then I can remember some of those stories getting a reaction, that I wrote a cliffhanger that made my brother laugh and thought, I've got to do that. And
did you mean to make him laugh?
yeah, well, it's just, I did the sort of thing I still do now, where I wrote a cliffhanger without having any idea how I was going to get out of it, and then my solution.
Isn't that how all the best ones come out?
Yeah. I've actually worked on a thing where the kind of impetus was that different writers all had to do is sort of get out of that ending, and then the next person had to take it on. But in this case,
the next one.
In this case, the hero was faced with somebody with a gun, and the gun goes off, and that's the cliffhanger.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do I get out of that? So the smoke clears, and the person with the gun is dead, because he's forgotten that to prevent robbers, his gun shoots backwards, which was ridiculous. But was the only thing I could think of to get out of it.
Let me make a note of that.
Yeah.
Write that down.
And
He's going to use that one.
Wait, stop stealing the idea.
But it made my, I don't know how old he was, 5-year-old brother laugh. So it was just that those little
funny.
things of getting a reaction. And then
That's like you said, Peter. Yeah.
And as you get older, you sort of, so I had kind of fancied being a writer as a job, but no more so than I fancied being a pop star or being James Bond, or I didn't really know how you did it. And then because I was reading Doctor Who books, I read an interview with Paul Cornell about writing Doctor Who stuff, and he laid out what you had to do. It was an amazing interview. Rather than where do you get your ideas from, it was, these are the people you write to, this is the address, this is what they'll send you, and this is what you have to do, and this is how much you get paid. And it was like, suddenly it was
even better.
Suddenly it was a job. It's like, you could actually do this. So
well, because it is one of those things. Sorry to interrupt, but like when you're at school and you think, how do people write? How do you get to do that as a job? And it sort of doesn't seem real in a way, does it? And like when I was making films and stuff, how do you turn that into a job? And it can seem quite unreal.
I'm still figuring that out. Like, how do you do it? How do you get anyone to pay you for it? I don't really know.
He says that with all them titles under
That's
his
after
belt.
you've actually delivered the manuscript. Right?
You can always take the Douglas Adams approach and just wave at their deadlines as they go by, and just have another glass of wine.
That's much easier to do when your first book has been an international bestseller and made you a millionaire.
Yes.
Yeah, you get the leeway then. Yeah,
it's a good point.
When you read that, go ahead, Paul. I was going to say, when you read that bit with Paul there, Simon, what did you do next that led to you getting professionally published? Did you write a spec script or?
Yes. So in those days, it was when Doctor Who wasn't on telly, and new Doctor Who books were being published by Virgin Publishing, and. I wrote off with the guidelines, and they sent me the guidelines, and I came up with an idea, and they sent me a very nice 3-page rejection letter, because they wanted me to. I've spoken to the guy who sent me that rejection letter and went, "Why on earth did you spend that amount of time, on my terrible idea?" And he said, "Because we wanted we wanted to make sure you carried on buying the books," which I did. But that meant because it was encouraging, I sent them something else, and I carried on sending them things, and the notes I would get back became more specific about so I had the sense that I was getting better at it and closer to the goal. And at the same time, I was going to university and learning about stuff, and I got a job in publishing, and I sent stuff to anybody I could think of and got bits and pieces back, and slowly kind of made progress towards that goal. Actually, it was easy because I knew it took time, but I knew what I wanted to do. So it was just about, how do I get there? How do I get closer to that end point? I think it's much harder if you kind of think, well, I fancy working in films, or I fancy working in video or whatever, but I don't really know what bit of it I want to do.
Yeah.
I think it's a good point.
Yeah.
Try and be focused on one area. I guess. I suppose so. Peter
No,
was...
yeah. Sorry.
My turn now. You sit back for a minute, Jeff. Behave yourself. He does this all the time, you know. Right? Anyway, but if I recall, I mean, Peter, was your route up through the fanzines because you were writing quite a lot of articles, weren't you?
Sort of. When I was a teenager, I sent ideas into the BBC because I thought that's what you did.
Best way to do it. And, straight to the lion's mouth.
And unlike production companies these days, the BBC wanted to make sure that they engage with license players. So I got letters back from people like Anthony Reid and Douglas Adams and Chris Boucher about things I'd sent in. And
Simon's face. You never told me that.
I had no idea.
And in particular, the letter I got from Douglas Adams, had an interesting note about what I'd written. It wasn't just, thank you for your submission, which was very neatly typed. It was... in fact, the phrase that sticks out was, in this particular story, I think that it might have been the master was in the story. He said, I think that, the master's plan is burning down a house to boil an egg. What a great phrase that is about, the motivations of the particular character. With Chris Boucher, because I'd sent him some thoughts about Blake 7, I think it was something like a 2 or 3 page handwritten letter.
Oh, wow.
And it was written over 2 days. Either he'd written it over 2 days or he'd faked it as though it was written over 2 days. Because halfway through the letter, there was a change of pen. And, it was sorry for the delay. It's been a bit busy recently. And then he was carried on talking about what I'd written. So that suggests, that it was interesting I got some useful, constructive feedback. It wasn't a yes. And then when it came to... And then, I didn't get a job as a writer... But I got a job working as a technical author for IBM, working with, among others, Justin Richards and Craig Hinton, who had written for some of those early Virgin novels. And as it happened, Justin and Andy Lane, both university contemporaries, had taken on the editing role for one of the Decalogue series, which is a series of 10 short stories, and asked me whether I had any ideas. And I thought, yes, I do. And I wrote a story about Sarah Jane and K9. And that was my first professionally published piece of fiction.
It's fantastic.
And as a result of that was, if you like, my calling card for when the BBC Books came along and said, we're looking for people who've got interesting things to do. I have to say, back in those days, companies like Virgin Publishing and BBC Books were much more prepared to spend time and effort, and it's a not insubstantial thing to do, encouraging completely new writers to submit ideas. I think the closest there is to this at the moment is the Big Finish short trip opportunity competition in memory of Paul Spragg. And as it happens, I'm very happy to say, I'm as the producer of that range now for Big Finish. I'm one of the judges for that competition each year. Yeah. And that's a kind of reflection on give back about opportunities for people who don't have the set of contacts or the network already in place, but have got interest, enthusiasm, talent, and can write to a specification. That's a very long answer to a simple question, isn't it? I'm sorry.
No. But I think... Sorry, someone go ahead.
I was just going to say my first professional commission was a short story as well. It was for Big Finish's first short trips book. So clearly all the best writers start in the short stories.
Good route then.
Yeah.
Clearly.
I have tried to convince them that they should commission it on, on alphabetical order, but I realise that just means that Ben Aronovich will write everything.
Well, I have to say, because I remember I put it out there actually. Was it Up a Bit, that one? Frontier Worlds was, I think, the first novel of yours that I read, Peter. Which is for those who don't know, it's an 8th Doctor adventure by BBC Books, 1998, 9ish, something like that. Anyway.
Yep, 1999, I think.
And it's there you go. And I honestly, I remember, I think I wrote a letter to somebody, because I got a letter back, just remarking on how much I'd really enjoyed this book, because there was.
Bless you for that. Thank you.
I can't remember who sent me the letter or who I sent it to, but somebody wrote back and saying thank you very much and really appreciate it. But it was like the authenticity of the world building, I think, there that I really enjoyed. It's if I recall, I mean, it's a while since I read it, but it focuses very heavily on one of the Doctor's companions, Fitz. He's our kind of way into it, and we got compassion, the human TARDIS in there as well, which is always a great idea. I love that. But Frontier Worlds I would recommend to everybody, and I remember Cassal as well, the earlier story, which again great, but Frontier Worlds particularly is the only one out of all the Eighth Doctor ranges that I've actually had occasion to write a letter and say how much I enjoyed this novel, because I genuinely did. So it's quite nice to be able to tell you that directly, Peter.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. It's always lovely to hear what people think. There was a time when recognising that a lot of the help I'd got with my early stuff was reading what other writers had put onto their website. So Simon talks about hearing Paul Cornell talk about his writing experience. I remember reading, among others, Gary Russell had put a whole load of stuff on a website that he used to run about the things that he'd written, the experience he'd got, and so on. And I thought, I can do this as well. And I'd written various short stories and audios and novels mostly for BBC Books. So I published little narratives about my experience of being commissioned. I published this is back in the days when the author retained the copyrights, by the way. So I published the outlines as well, and the scene breakdowns, and a sample chapter. And I also used to publish all the reviews I could find of it, good, bad, and indifferent. Because I thought here's an interesting way of viewing what the end result of what people have said. So that was kind of part of my reflection on sharing back with people how I'd got into writing and how I wanted to encourage them to do it as well.
Yeah, that's really good. What would be the main sort of advice you'd give someone now, who's trying to get into writing, bearing in mind how different it is these days, and also in some ways harder, I would say, maybe? Do you think? Like you both,
I think it's definitely harder. Yes. Yeah. So yes, there are fewer Doctor Who books being published these days than there were. There were what it was like 22 a year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was 2 a month except for Christmas. And companies are less willing to go through a slush pile of stuff as well. So BBC Books will typically commission from people who've got a track record already of having written, not always necessarily having written Doctor Who. There's a piece of advice from Eric Seward in Doctor Who magazine when he was asked about what's your advice to people who want to write Doctor Who. His answer was, don't
do it.
And then he went on to explain why. And what he was saying was, don't just want to write Doctor Who. Want to write. You want to enjoy writing.
Just in general.
For 2 reasons. One is the chances of writing for Doctor Who are more difficult, not impossible, but more difficult. And the second thing is that that's all you really want to write. You're not really exploring your interests and your enthusiasms more widely.
Yeah,
what are your thoughts, Simon?
I agree with all of that. I think Peter's already mentioned the Paul Spragger competition that Big Finish runs every year, which I definitely recommend. But actually, just writing, just write. If you want to write, it's if you want to work on a film, you've got to find people who'll do that. You need kit, you need crew, you need support. Writing, you can do yourself. You can fill out a notebook, just a bit, just finish a story, then go back and make it better. There's various places that will buy short stories. The money's not amazing, but it's something.
Yeah, it's still out there.
It's a start.
And what you do is you build up a track record, and once you've got a few things published, then BBC Books and Big Finish and whoever else will consider you, and there are loads of people who've got in that way. So it's not the route has changed, but it's not the route. There is still a route if that's what you want to do. And also,
and the other thing is that It's easier now to publish things than ever before for yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're saying, I want it to be published by BBC Books, the opportunities are quite small. If you want to write for Big Finish, it's not. There's more opportunity, but it's still quite small. It's like saying, I want to write for HarperCollins, or I want to write one of the Star Wars books, or I want to write a Star Trek tie-in book.
It's too niche.
But you can write your own stuff which you're enthusiastic about and share it still through fanzines and web pages and blogs and so on. If you're really enthusiastic about writing, you will want to write and publish it anywhere. If you're simply focused on getting it published by a particular publisher, you're narrowing down your options right from the start.
It's interesting what you said there, Simon, like about with films and filmmaking and stuff, because you know, I see quite a lot of people online who are aspiring filmmakers, and I sort of think, go out and do it. You know, when I was starting out, 25 years ago, it was quite a bit harder than it is now. You know, I didn't have a camera in my pocket that could make a half-decent film. But you're right, you've got to get your sound and your crew and stuff like that. But to be a writer, you don't need any of that, so just go and do it. And I think that what you said about, self-publishing and things is quite interesting as well, because I used to shoot quite a lot of music videos for, indie bands and stuff. And over time things changed, and record labels and stuff would be more interested to know that a band already had something of a following online, i.e. an already invested audience. So if they were going to get a one-off single deal or EP, whatever, or is there people who's going to buy it already? And I think if you can self-publish and make that start to work for you, you probably become a bit more of an appealing prospect when you start going, to the publishers and stuff.
I think it's also about making connections with people as well. So I mean, I very consciously moved myself into fan circles because I knew people like Peter who had published books and whatever could give me advice and things. But I also was looking for anything even vaguely related to publishing that I could get in on. And I was working for an advertising agency and a publishing company, and things like that, trying to, doing management jobs. Weirdly, the management job I was doing and having a spreadsheet for the budget led to me getting my name on the cover of a book for the first time. Because when I was put up for a job editing a book by Paul Cornell, was editing a book for Big Finish, and couldn't meet the commitments because he was on Doctor Who writing Father's Day, and kind of something needed to give. He suggested that I edit the book, and Gary Russell, who was then at Big Finish, his concern was could I project manage an anthology and get it in on time? Yeah. And I could go, well, this is the spreadsheet I use for running other publishing projects. And he was like, well, you know what you're doing. Yeah. So this job I'd been trying to escape was the thing that led to my name being on the cover of a book for the first time. So all of that stuff is useful. All of that is, you pick it all up and apply it.
I guess the thing is, really,
I suppose the message is that there isn't a single answer about here's the route through you have to go to get to where you want to be. It's a whole concatenation of different experiences and enthusiasms and motivations and contacts, and each person will have their own different route through. I like
having a drive.
McCormack talking about how she got through. I've worked with Una on Blake 7 most recently. She got into. She's a New York Times best-selling author now. But she got into writing because she wrote Tolkien fan fiction. She just loved writing. She just loved sharing it with people on bulletin boards and so on.
I mean, it's the thing now, isn't it? You can build up a following, can't you? You can find your audience. Small to start with, but reading excerpts of your stories on TikTok, putting links on to blogs on Twitter and X, whatever it is, all that. I mean, social media is a great tool for for introducing yourself to wider communities, I think.
So I'd just like to.
That was quite wisdom-like of me, there, wasn't it? I was like,
yes, it was quite
I actually knew
profound.
What I was talking about. It's quite impressive.
I didn't.
Hey.
thought I can't follow that at the same level,
don't
so I'm
even
just going to change
Go on
subject completely.
Change subject. Go left.
So Simon, you've got Whotopia coming out in
Yes.
about a month and a half,
Yes.
I guess, isn't it, or a little bit sooner? So we don't know much about it, but it sounds pretty awesome. So
give me a sec.
What can you tell us?
Hang on a
about
sec.
that?
I'll go and get it.
Ooh.
Oh yeah,
I bet
blighter.
you've got the copies available. One of the
our
joys
audio
of
listeners.
writing these things is you get author copies quite early on, you see.
Yes.
So,
So does
look
that
at
ever get
this.
boring, Peter? Is it still as exciting as it was in day one?
no, I open the box and I just breathe in the paper like this. Oh, it's fantastic.
Go on in, Simon. Show us it.
Look
What have
at
you got?
this.
Oh,
It's
look at
fabulous.
So this is
Speaking of Una McCormack, she worked on that with you and
Johnny.
Morris,
so yeah,
right?
so it's a big. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a coffee table
Looks
guide to
Wow. Oh,
all
look
of
at
Doctor Who. Loads and loads and loads of it. Absolutely beautiful.
Lush.
I'm not really showing it at its. You kind of need to. You need to flick through it yourselves.
But
But
it's-
it's
Yeah, we
Yes.
kind of want to
touch it.
feel that. It looks
Yeah.
weighty
Yeah.
and it looks glossy and shiny and lovely. bits
Lovely.
And
yeah. So this
nice
was
typesetting and everything.
and then beautiful Lee binding illustrations and it's
fantastic.
just
Oh,
it's absolutely.
fantastic,
So
yeah.
designer Richard Atkinson has really knocked himself out on that. So that's it was Jonathan Morris's project, and he had me and Una as
Yeah.
assistants. So we just did what he said. Really, it was really fun, and he gave us little
They
assignments.
want to go.
And it's a kind of cornucopia of Doctor Who. All the characters, doctors, companions, monsters, machines, and really fun. Hopefully, a slightly different take on all of these things, which is what we're obviously trying to do. So, lots of the entries are written as if written by the people themselves.
Yeah,
I had
sort of thought, yeah.
I had quite a time. I'm trying to remember who I wrote. I wrote. I'm quite pleased of Sarah Jane Smith. I think that one was quite.
Go on. Oh,
That
okay.
was quite a good
Yeah.
one. Just great fun, really. And it overlapped with what I was
A
doing
lot
on
of joy for that.
Daily Doctor, so it was slightly nuts. A few weeks.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I'm watching more Doctor Who. Great. So can't really complain.
Yeah. Well, it's not a bad job, is it, really?
It's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm very
Looks
much looking
beautiful.
forward to
Looks
looking at that
absolutely
one.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Looks really, really nice.
You should ask Simon about his David Whitaker book as well, which is thoroughly researched, meticulous in its detail,
come on then.
and really, really nicely written. I mean, it's not just just been dashed off. It's a work of research and love.
Oh, bless you.
Is this and David Whitaker in an exciting adventure with television?
That is exactly it, which is published on the 6th of November
it.
by 10 Acre. Yes, so
Yeah.
for those who don't know, shame on you, but David Whitaker was the first story editor of Doctor Who. So he also wrote more episodes. He's credited as writer on more episodes in the 1960s than anybody else. As a result of that, he's also the writer of more missing episodes than any other single writer. But he's the guy who commissioned the Dalek stories. He probably came up with the word exterminate for the Daleks. He created or wrote the first episodes of the Second Doctor, companions Vicky, Victoria, and Zoe. So there's loads of kind of important foundational stuff he was involved in. And until a few years ago, we knew very, very little about him. He died in 1980. Really, just as fandom was beginning to interview people and chart the history of the program in depth. And it turns out, which is what I found out in 2016 when I was researching The Evil of the Daleks for a book, that there's a whole load of stuff that we thought we knew about him and gets repeated a lot that isn't true. So one thing that you'll see quite a lot said about him is that he wrote a play. He was an actor, and he wrote a play for the Theatre Royal York that was spotted by somebody at the BBC, who then offered him a job working in television. That's not true at all. He had already written for television when he staged his first play. So and that changes what we know about him and what drove him and things. So I've just been on a great long 6-year research thing, and it's a bit weird to be able to share it with everybody, because I've kind of been sitting on all of this for quite a long time. But yeah, it's
I saw it. It came up on the Doctor Who site merchandise guide, which is I have it bookmarked.
Nice.
Because they'll update with all new books and merch and stuff like that, and it's a great little website for finding out everything that's coming out. So yeah, they just put it up there the other day. So I guess pre-orders are open now.
So pre-orders opened last week. So it's all suddenly it's out there, and there's a cover out there, and people are talking about it. So, but I spoke to David's niece last week and sent her a copy of the cover, and she's very excited about it. So all of that kind of stuff is really really nice.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that, because it's like you said, a lot of people who are working on the show in the 60s, there are some names that we seem to know a lot about or enough about. We know a decent amount about Verity Lambert and where she was and what she was doing, and probably there's a whole load more stuff that we could probably find out. But you're right, David Whitaker, who was instrumental in shaping those early years of Doctor Who, and writing, as well as that, writing some of the most incredible moments in his episode. I mean, crikey, some of the darker ones as well. I mean, the rescue, when you look at it, is incredibly dark. You got a young teenage girl who's been manipulated by pretty much a serial killer. You know what I mean? It's that kind of stuff for years. He changes the way she thinks. He imprisons her, and there's a bit of Stockholm syndrome going on. And then Power of the Daleks, where we have the Daleks at their most evil. They are dark in episodes 4, 5 and 6 of that story, and the way the humans sort of play on that, it's David Whitaker had a very clever way of bringing real darkness into stories, but at such a level where we almost don't see it until a point where you stop and think, oh, is this really what I'm thinking it is? And it carries you with it anyway. You cannot take your eyes off of David Whitaker, at least I can't. You start watching them, you're hooked. You're there. The Crusades, again, it's just incredible. So I'd definitely be looking to find out more about him.
Yeah, I think
that's an interesting example of inspiration for writing as well. One of the earliest Doctor Who books I read was the Crusade, and indeed the original Daleks book as well. Just how to convey that interestingly in prose, as opposed to being on the telly. You've also done a Black Archive thing, haven't you, Simon, about the Edge of Destruction?
I have. Oh, this is. I'm glad we brought you, Peter. This is good. Yes. So I've also written. Part of the thing was that in researching all of this David Whitaker stuff, I realised there were things that weren't going to fit in the book. So I've also written a Black Archive book on the Edge of Destruction, the third Doctor Who serial, which is a very odd little 2-part story. And importantly, the reason this came about is because two things. One was that Toby Haydock does a podcast called Too Much Information, where he goes through each episode of Doctor Who in great depth, the production history. And there are production files. There's a lot of paperwork about the early years of Doctor Who, but there isn't a production file for The Edge of Destruction. So Toby was kind of asked, was there anything in my David Whitaker research that could add light to it, or anything I'd found? So I sent him some things, but basically said to him, there's just this gap in the paper trail. If you put it all in order, in chronological order, there's just this hole. And then last year, Una McCormack actually wangled me an invitation to the Large Hadron Collider and CERN, which was extraordinarily exciting. But one of the things we were talking about there was that what the Hadron Collider is doing and what people are doing in trying to detect black holes is you're looking for something that you can't look at directly. So the way that you do that is you kind of work out the fuzzy edges. And once you've worked out the fuzzy edges of what's there, you can then make deductions about what's on the inside. So I've done that to the edge of destruction.
Starting at its fuzzy edges.
Yeah. So what do we
through the middle?
What do we know? That's the first part of the book.
Yeah.
So what do we know for sure? What are the facts? And then from that, 10 deductions, 10 absurd theories, including things like why does the TARDIS have roundels? Is one of them. I think I know.
Really?
But to find out,
what I like about that is it's honest about speculation.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, don't tell us.
I like the fact that it's honest about speculation rather than presenting speculation as fact.
Yes.
Which has been sort of characteristic of a lot of Doctor Who's history in the past, and it's become, as indeed Simon unpicks in his David Whitaker book, it becomes a fact because it's been stated by apparently authoritative sources.
Yeah, there's a.
I'm looking forward to your book on Alice Frick next, by the way.
On what, sorry?
Alice Frick. Well, I feel that Paul Hayes has already done that in his amazing Pull to Open, which is a history of the first year of Doctor Who, or rather the year that it gets made.
That's
amazing. So you know the annoying thing about that book, it's really good, but he sent it to me, and I was deep into writing my David Whitaker book, and I've been reading all the paper. I've been reading the same paperwork he has. I've been reading about all the stuff. And then I read his chapter, and it's like, I've read about Eric Maskowitz, the former head of light entertainment at the BBC, the man who wrote A Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square. He's the guy who commissions the science fiction report that is the earliest dated document in the Doctor Who production files, and so was clearly an influence on it. Paul describes Eric Maskowitz in a way like I feel like I've met him. I feel like I'm in the room with him. Amazing bit of writing. It's really vivid, and all of these people who are on the peripheries of what we know about Doctor Who, he really ties all that all together. It's an amazing piece of work. Damn him. I did kind of have to think. I'm going to have to change what I'm doing.
That's very typical of authors, isn't it, Simon? We like to say, "Yeah, I really enjoyed it."
Really enjoyed it. It was fantastic.
Through gritted teeth,
And the thing is, when it actually is really fantastic as well, is like, because nothing you pull apart from it then. It's like you just have to say, well done, brilliant.
So, excuse me, what can I ask, what are you both working on at the moment? This is a question that often gets people saying, we can't tell you.
Can't tell you.
Yeah.
Because I haven't done it
yet.
Well,
alas, I can't tell you because nothing has been announced.
But
at the moment, it's all for Big Finish.
Okay.
Wow.
In fact, the only thing I can mention is that, and I can't even tell you what the title of it is, but I'm currently working on the winner of this year's Paul Spragg Big Finish short trip opportunity, because that needs to get to the studio and be recorded in time for December. And the way Big Finish works is we tend not to announce what things are until they've been recorded, because that's the point at which you've actually got something to talk about. You know it's not going to sort of accidentally slip and not happen. But there's some other bits and pieces I'm working on which are for next year. Alas, I can't say what they are, but they're fantastic.
Okay,
that's what I like. See, I'm excited.
What about you,
you haven't told us anything.
I mean, we've just listed loads of stuff I've got out in the next week, month stuff.
You need a break, if anything. Surely
is that not enough? Have I not sweated and bled enough for you?
We want more.
I'll tell you what, a whole bunch of fans are going to ask, though. I would like to know, are you going to write any more Blake 7? Is there going to be any more Blake 7 Big Finish or something like that?
That would be lovely, wouldn't it?
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Nicely diplomatic answer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
I'm excited. Do you know if there was like two series from 70s, 80s, which I could just lose myself in? It's Doctor Who and Blake Seven. I mean, I always kind of liked things like Space 1999, but I think with those things, I like the idea of it more than the actual show, because I can never remember actually sitting through an entire episode of Space 1999. And to be fair, I'm not even sure I could do it now, to be honest. But Blake Seven, Doctor Who, give me that anytime, you know.
Those were definitely my two principal passions. Obviously, I loved lots of other stuff as well. I can remember watching the Time Tunnel. I can remember watching Star Trek in its various incarnations. Yeah. But yeah, the things that stuck in my mind were definitely Blake Seven and Doctor Who. And indeed, when you mentioned Frontier Worlds as the novel, Frontier Worlds was the name of the fanzine that I ran with a couple of my pals for a number of years. And that was a Blake Seven and Doctor Who fanzine, which had fiction and stories and analysis and interviews and various bits and pieces. And as a good example, I think, of the equivalent of doing your own webpage these days. We didn't worry that we were only selling this to I can't remember what the biggest print run we ever had. It was like 500, I think, at the maximum. We didn't worry about it's only gone out to 500 people. It was we've done something we can share with people who are like-minded. And they seem to really like it and comment and send stuff back. So the same is going to be true of websites and so on.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, it's kind of like what we do with the podcast, isn't it, Jeff?
Yeah.
We start this just a project and we're getting crazy numbers of listeners now, which is just mad.
Yeah, and to find an audience who, we're just two nerds talking about Doctor Who, and
pretty much.
Occasionally other stuff.
You're two nerds talking to two nerds this evening, aren't you?
Yeah.
I was going to say we're two nerds who quite often have fantastic guests who sell it for us. So
yeah.
But if you want to,
plus we invited us this evening as well. Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, when you find an audience that shares your point of view, and you're saying the things that they think, and they start tuning in, and
like
it's
what
great.
you do as well.
Yeah,
I should say, by the way,
really
I love working with Simon. It was a chance I couldn't turn down when Steve Cole asked me to take part in this. Simon has been a great support through Big Finish and stuff. There was something I particularly remember. You may remember this as well, Simon. It was a Fifth Doctor audio I was writing, and Simon had done one of the earlier stories. It was called the Chaos Pool. And I had a bit of a crisis of confidence as I was coming up with the outline. And so I thought, who can I trust to give me some advice on this and give me some candid advice about what's working and what's not working? So I sent up the outline to Simon. And I knew that I'd got it about right when the principal comment he had about one of the cliffhangers was simply the word, ha-ha! Exclamation mark. And that was exactly what I was hoping for that particular cliffhanger, you see.
It was a diabolically
it was that kind of constructive, evidence-based feedback I was looking for that I really enjoyed.
Yeah. That was a good twist.
I remember the Chaos Pool. That's a key to time one, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was going to ask, actually, do you two guys get on quite well with working together on this project?
Yeah.
I can't bear him. I get dragged into these things with him all the
time. I know that feeling, Peter.
Peter and I, so we've been friends for a long time, so it's all very, it's just very easy, really. It was, we didn't really, we didn't communicate a great deal in writing our bits. We just got on and did it, kind of trusting each other. We know each other, so there was a bit of back and forth in the editorial stages, and I think there was definitely some bits and pieces where we kind of looked at each other's stuff, and Steve Cole, who's our editor, reworked bits and pieces and in consultation and stuff. But it was very easy. I think that more the only time I've kind of thought it was more strange, I was script editor on a Blake Seven play that Peter wrote a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But he was the producer, so I was working for him, but he was working for me. It was a weird kind of So there was a kind of thing of
some kind of like an infinite.
There was a kind of thing of who tells who what to do. I'm not quite sure where it was fine, but there was a kind of thing
passing
of
memos around each other.
But there's always a point where you don't quite agree. So who gets the final say on things in that situation?
Yeah.
I think that was it all got sorted out. But it was.
Do you know the terrible thing is I didn't think about that at the time. One of the things was because I was working on 9 scripts at the same time. It was 3 box sets of 3, and I knew that I was going to be writing the final one. In fact, the executive producer at the time, David Richardson, essentially said, how many do you want to write? And I said, well, if I'm going to be doing this many and something else as well, I think I can probably only find time for 1. Rather than fantastic, I'll do all 9. So I did that, and it always, obviously, if you're writing something, you need to have somebody give you that other perspective. So that's why we invited Simon in to script edit mine. And by the time of the 3rd box set, I'd taken over as producer from David Richardson. And Simon, I never thought of that sort of hierarchy when I was asking you to do it. I just thought, here's someone who will give me some sensible, sound advice that I will value from the stuff we'd done previously.
And also because Peter was the producer and producer of the whole range, he knew it all. He knew the stories, he knew the context and whatever. His Blake Seven knowledge is much greater than mine as well. So I was kind of coasting in his wake, and mostly I think my notes were, it had it was Villa, wasn't it? And it was mostly I'd worked with Michael Keating, the actor, several times before. So I was just thinking, what would he like to do? Maybe we should give him some. Yeah. Why don't we get him to play a different character let him be undercover at the beginning, so he can play a different part, because I know he likes doing that. And then the gag is that everybody knows it's Villa. Would that work? I think that was my chief contribution.
That was a terrific note. And it's a terrific note, and it really launches the story very nicely, because the story is about Villa trying to find his way back to the Liberator and struggling against it. And the irony, as Simon says, is he thinks he's being tremendously smart, and actually everyone knows it's him, which is a really good route into the story. And so that worked really nice. And as you say, it works really nice for Michael Keating. When you're writing audios, I don't know what Simon's thought about it is. There's a sort of hierarchy of people you want to please. First of all, you want to please yourself, because you want to be enjoying writing the story. You don't want to have a miserable time doing it. You want to please the script editor and or the producer, because they're the ones who are going to say, yep, we want to go ahead and do this. You want to please the people who are in the studio, because if they're having a fun time and enjoying it, not frivolously, but because they feel like they're being given something interesting to do, they'll come up with the goods. And then, of course, last but not least, the audience. You want them to be really enjoying it as well. And so that's a balance of stuff to write.
And I think if the people higher up in that list are enjoying it, then the audience will as well. It kind of filters down through,
doesn't it? Yeah.
You hope so, yeah, because you're hoping that your producer, your executive producer, have got a feeling for what's going to work for the particular series that you're working on. Yeah. There are 1 or 2 things I've worked on where the producers have changed halfway through. But there's one thing I've worked on that they changed halfway through and then changed back again.
All right.
So you're going, what are the notes that person then said, and how does that fit into that?
78, 79.
Yeah, but most of all, you want to have a fun time. Like the people I'm fortunate in that I can be a bit, I can pick and choose a bit about what I do, and I choose to do projects which interest me, and people who I will enjoy working with, because the whole thing will be a generally happier experience. There have been a couple of things I've been asked to write this year when I've said, oh, that sounds absolutely fascinating, but I don't think I would enjoy it very much, and I wouldn't do a great job, so I'd be letting you down.
And it's so important, isn't it? To enjoy what you're doing and therefore do better on it.
But as I say, not all writers are in that situation. So it works for me. It might not work for others. Simon is in constant demand, as you've already heard.
Yes.
Simon, darling, we've got a new project. We'd love you to take part in it if you would, please.
It never goes like that. Yeah, that's fabulous. Now that is what sounds very familiar. Yes.
Is that, I can't pay for it, but
Yeah, the exposure will be great.
Oh no, they don't even
just
offer.
think of it, your name in lights
Yeah,
everywhere.
they don't even offer that as well. It's just it's
Oh well.
yeah. At different points in my sort of career, I just said yes to everything.
Yeah.
And you learn a lot doing that.
Yeah.
You learn the things you like doing, and you learn the people you like working with, and contrariwise. And you can be a bit more selective as you go on, I guess. I think we were talking earlier about, don't just try and be a Doctor Who writer. When I started, I had an idea of all the things I wanted to do, big and small. I wanted to work. I wanted to work on Doctor Who. I wanted to, work for Big Finish. I wanted to do a Doctor Who novel. I wanted to write for telly. All of those sorts of things. I wanted to write a James Bond film. All of those kind of things that I had in mind.
Yeah.
And now it's much more. Who I work with is much more of a concern. I want to work with people I respect and cut creative sparks with. So it's so the work is satisfying, rather than what the things might actually be, I think. And if you can get that right,
important point to make. Sorry, go on. Yeah. Because one of the last things you want to do when there's something, when you're doing something that you've always wanted to do or that you enjoy doing right now, because it's kind of a hobby and it's turning into your livelihood, is for that then to become like a trudge. You don't want it to become like a treadmill, right, where you've just got to churn out content after content after content. And there must be quite a few writers and other creatives who fall down into that trap almost and have to kind of fight to get back out of it. So I think if you're in a position where you say, well, okay, I'm going to choose this, I'm going to choose that, we'll work with these people. And I think that's the same in anything in life that you do. If you can find yourself in a position where you can choose your work so that you enjoy it, so that you have a pride in it and that other people enjoy it, I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I'm sure there must be a quote in Doctor Who somewhere which goes for that.
Doctor Who says when he's asked
I think there
what
might
his
be an
job
entry
is.
in our book about that somewhere as well.
Yeah.
I'm just having fun.
Enjoy your job. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just having fun. Indeed.
Yeah, that's in Waters of Mars, isn't it? What's your name, rank, and job occupation or something, isn't it?
You didn't rehearse that, did you, Jeff?
Doctor, no. But, and he says...
That's why he's behind the camera.
Yeah. But you know the bit I mean, yeah. So I've just got one more question for the pair of you before we wrap up. I suppose it's going to be two now, actually, thinking about it. Which Doctor is your favourite to write for, and is there a Doctor that you haven't written for that you'd like to?
Ooh.
That's like asking me which of my children I love most.
Yep.
Which I suppose it is.
Do you have an answer?
Way, really,
the Doctors I have enjoyed writing for most, just because of the nature of the jobs that I've done, have been Tom Baker and David Tennant. Which isn't to say that they're necessarily my favourite Doctors, it's just those are the jobs I've enjoyed most. Those are the ones where I thought I got the voice right.
Yeah, it must have been a thrill writing for Tom Baker, I think. Because...
Yes, that might have been imprudent for me to have said that now.
Doctor, What about you, Simon?
Being Tom Baker's producer was pretty exciting. I produced 2 Lost Stories that were released earlier this year. That was, and it wasn't at all what I'd expected.
Yeah.
I thought he would be quite, he's done this for so many years, and he's done so many Big Finishes and stuff. I thought he'd just come in and it'd all be whatever. But he had gone through the script. He had notes. He had thoughts. He wanted to discuss it. Really? He was really engaged. So I found myself discussing at quite a deep level how he sees the Doctor and how he should play it and what the sort of Doctor's thought processes are. Which, to be honest, I would have paid for. That was fascinating, and really.
Yeah,
that's brilliant that he's got that passion and care for
it. Yeah, it was great, absolutely great. and he was really funny as well, and abrasive, but in a funny, engaging way. So that was great. That was exactly that kind of creative sparks thing I was talking about. But otherwise, favourite doctors and things. I never get to choose which doctors I write for or companions. That's always they come to you with that.
That's interesting.
But that's the bit I like, is kind of, come up with a story for these people that something they haven't done before, that's a bit new, that reveals something new about them. That's what I'm kind of in it for. That's the bit I really like. It'd be quite nice to cross off some of the doctors I haven't written for, but I don't. It's not my choice. So
there's time.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. The idea of tying things together. I like writing jigsaw stories which connect stuff together, either in a series or just with elements of the TV series. Because the balance you want to strike there is you don't want something to be so pedantic that you have to understand the backstory intimately to be able to understand the story. But it's useful to be able to sort of tie those things together in an interesting, new, novel way, which comes up with a whole new story.
Yeah, it's interesting because Big Finish does seem to do it does do a lot of that, isn't it? Pulling things from different eras of Doctor Who, different actors from here, characters from there, characters from everywhere, and let's write a story about them. And it seems to be more of it than ever now. It's huge, it's massive.
Well, it certainly does appeal to a demographic that buy the Big Finish stories.
Yeah. And of course we got Jodie Whittaker's first audio book out, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yes,
soon.
So we're fully expecting
BBC.
her to be on Big Finish soon.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
They're not giving anything away.
I need to work on my leading questions a little bit more.
I don't know about Peter. I don't know anything. They don't. Yeah, I've no idea.
They don't tell us anything.
Yeah.
The only things we know are things that we're working on at the moment. I'm quite right too.
Yeah.
Quite right too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you both.
And having a chance to read the book as well and look through that.
Yes, you did, didn't you, Jeff?
Yeah. Just
there it is.
Cool. There's the book that everyone else
has got apart from me. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. I've got my screenshots on my phone. Don't worry.
Yeah, I sent you some pictures, didn't I? Yeah.
And there is a sample of it on the BBC website as well. You can actually read some of a sample. Is it one from each of the doctors? I think there's a sample on the BBC website, which
Okay. We'll link to.
Were I any kind of professional, I would be able to give you a URL for now. But as I'm not, I can't.
We'll find it. Don't worry. We'll put
it. We look forward to reading Whotopia when it comes out in a few weeks as well, Simon.
Definitely looking forward to that one.
If you've been good,
congrats on
good. If you've been good, it's the perfect thing for Christmas. So.
Oh, look at that! Yeah,
yes.
Of course.
Yeah,
out in time for Christmas. That's
just
brilliant.
in time. Yeah, brilliant.
Simon, Peter, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure and a delight to have you both on, and wish you every success, as if you need it, in all the different projects that you're working on now and in the future.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. One more attempt at our surnames now.
And Anghelides.
No.
4 out of 10.
Yeah.
2 out of 10.
And let me have a go. Anghelides and Guerrier.
Very good.
1 out of 10.
Yeah.
Is that name?
There you go.
All right.